Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rock That Relationship. We are so excited to be here today to talk about a really fascinating subject when we're looking at relationships and couples. And we have on Dr. Jackie Black, who is a marriage educator and board certified coach to couples. And so we're really excited to hear all about what Dr. Jackie has to say about the subject of caretaking in relationships when one partner is ill or injured or needs some type of assistance. Then we can hear what Dr. Jackie has to say. What are some things that we can do to help those relationships thrive? So Dr. Jackie, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I love talking about this. It's such an important topic.
Well, great. Well, I can't wait to get into it. I know for me, in my family, my mother did many years of caretaking for her partner who had cancer and ended up passing away. And I saw what that kind of a toll took on their relationship and how that changed their dynamics. And that also happened with my stepmother and father as well. And so just wanted to be able to learn more strategies and ideas about how we can really thrive in these situations, even though they are really difficult and challenging. So maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work.
By accident, the way most people fall into, right, a passion or a mission. I had a friend who was in AA and asked me to go with her to Santa Rosa, California to an AA meeting. This is many, many, many years ago. And I said, sure. She just didn't want to go by herself, and she really wanted to go to this conference. And the first morning there was a speaker. His name was John James. And she said, will you just come with me? And then after that, I'll meet people and I'll feel settled. And I said, sure. And I went and I was mesmerized. He was talking about grief and loss from a different perspective. But it was so powerful and so meaningful to me. And I resonated with everything that he said. And I thought to myself, wow, this is really so meaningful, and it's work that I would love to do, right? Love to add to my practice. I was a psychologist in private practice at that time. And so I started to do a lot of, I don't want to say training, but a lot of seminars and read a lot of books and joined different organizations so that I could really learn and understand about grief and the grieving process. And it turned out a number of years later, I was on the national grief team when the AIDS quilt was on the mall. And I taught at UCLA. I was adjunct faculty and talked about grief in the classroom for educators K through 12. And it just was so meaningful and so powerful for me. And I spent a lot of years in the grief and loss community. And at some point, social service agencies, I had the only open bereavement group in the AIDS and HIV community for years.
Wow.
And it didn't make sense to me to close a group. How do you say to somebody who's grieving, I know you have to wait 12 weeks or 16 weeks. So and everybody thought it was crazy to have an open bereavement group, but those were the only bereavement groups that I ever ran. And then at some point, hospitals and hospices and social service agencies started doing bereavement groups for free. And so I sort of pivoted a little, still working with partners and families, but pivoted out of the world of grief and loss and into the world of couples and couples work, and then transitioned out of doing therapy into doing coaching. So, it's been, it's been a long time since I did 1999. I transitioned out of doing therapy into doing coaching and have always worked with couples and families. That work is very near and dear to my heart because our relationships with our partners are so important. No matter what is going on with either one of the partners or what is going on in the world that is affecting our relationships.
Right. And what are the main issues facing couples when one partner is seriously ill or has a chronic debilitating condition? Like, what are some of those issues?
Well, one of the first things that happens is that they're both thrown into survival mode because this catastrophic thing has happened. There's a diagnosis. And what most couples do is they jump onto the path of logistics. What doctors do we have to see? What procedures do we have to call? Where are the appointments? Where are we going? What are we doing? And that's the beginning, and it pulls couples into a different state, into a more heady space, a head space, a literal space, cognitive, because they're thinking, they're assessing, they're trying to figure stuff out. It's hard to navigate the waters of the medical system in the U.S., actually all over the world. I work in 8 countries, and there are no medical systems anywhere that are easy to traverse, and you have to, figure that out. So, then everybody's in survival mode, and you either find your coping mechanisms or you don't. So one or both people moves into coping. Well, coping isn't living. Coping isn't thriving. And then roles change. So there's the whole role reorganization piece. And sometimes there's this disbelief that it's even happening. And one partner isn't quite as on board as another partner. You'd be amazed at how often that happens.
Well, what do you mean by that isn't on board? Are they like living in denial? Or are they I'm going to do this differently?
I've been divorced once and widowed twice. And my second husband, Gary Black, had cancer, and he handled it very, very differently than Mark, my third husband. Gary just said, yeah, it'll be fine. And was a little bit laissez-faire about the whole thing. And so I was driving, you have to go to acupuncture, and we're going to cook and eat and blah, blah, blah. Mark was very aligned with his doctors. He was a wonderful, very sweet Midwestern guy from Wisconsin, and so turned over control, so to speak, to his doctors. Well, they're doctors and they know. And I have always bumped up against the medical community. I ask a lot of questions. I say no. I never turn over control, which is what I support clients to do, to really ask questions and make decisions, not because somebody says something, but does it make sense? Right. Not to go to the internet. That all medical information on the internet is generally at least 5 years old. So we don't want to send people to the internet. So what we really want to help, I want to help people to become problem solvers and critical thinkers around that. So there's one partner who's more that way, and another partner who is more relaxed, or says, okay, well, you tell me what to do and I'll do it. And those are the two extremes. And neither one is helpful or useful or beneficial to either the person who is ill or the partner.
Well, do you find that can I just to clarify, do you find that it's more often the partner who's ill is the one that's a little more laissez-faire, and their partner is the one saying, come on, we got to go to the doctor? Or does it just kind of fluctuate between them?
Yeah, it depends on the person, their personality, how they show up in the world. And it can be men or women, and it can be the ill partner or the care partner. And I don't call people caretakers. I refer to them as care partners. Care partners, just to clarify.
And you try to help them then get on the same page, right? Because it really doesn't matter. They can choose which route they're going, but if they're not on the same page, that's where you're going to get the conflict, right?
Yeah, exactly. exactly. And there's this insidious setup that happens with almost all couples, no matter what country, no matter what age, no matter what, there's this insidious setup that almost always happens. And that is that the ill person and the care partner both decide that all the focus should be on the person who's ill. Well, don't you know that I'm ill? I'm the one that gets the attention. I'm the one that gets the care. And they both agree. There's this collusion that happens. And I say it's insidious because the care partner doesn't stop having needs. Their needs change, but they don't stop having needs. They don't stop being a partner in a partnership, whether people have been married for a year or for 30 years. And the thing about illness is that it doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how many years you've been married. It matters what your emotional intelligence is and how you communicate. So partners who have generally communicated openly and well over however many years they've been together generally do better and need a little less support and education than those who were not talkers or didn't confront issues, or where the power structure was unequal.
See, it always comes back to communication. That's what I say in every podcast, right? It doesn't really matter what the illness is. It doesn't matter who wants to take what route. It's about how you communicate with each other, because that's where you're going to have the relationship breakup, right? Or problems, sand between the two people.
And I want to get both partners to honor and respect that each of them have needs, each of them have feelings, each of them have different reactions to the same diagnosis, so to speak, very, very different. And that's hard for people when they feel differently and they are reacting differently and need different things. Mark was very private. He didn't want anybody to know. And I said, that's fine. I can support you. And I need to tell both my children, all our kids were adults. I need to tell both my children, and I need to tell 2 friends, because I'm a talker and I need a place to talk, to share, to vent, to be real, to show up. And you can pick the friends, whoever you would be comfortable with. And he thought about it and he said, that's a really good idea. Kids are fine. And he said, what about this person and this person? I said, perfect. And later that day, he said, I think I'm going to do the same thing. I think it's a really good idea. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then the other thing I said to him was, I don't do martyr. Not only don't I do it well, I don't do it. And I'm going to become hell on wheels if I have to pretend that everything's fine, or I have to worry about you first. Right? I mean, I would spend my whole life, showing up in a very real way and honoring myself and my needs and my thoughts. Now to just put myself in a box and have this all be about you. And you're the person that I want to talk to when I get scared, when I get sad, when I get overwhelmed. You are my best friend and my partner, and you're the one I want to go to.
Because
go ahead.
If you were left as martyr, if you took on that martyr role, then if that person then passes away, you're left in this much worse position, right? Than if you were.
Even in a week or two, I would have had resentment. I wouldn't have been able to be compassionate and caring. And it takes so much energy and time and deliberate intention when you are present, really present with someone who is fighting for their life, whose body is failing them, who are going through so many emotions they never had, never expected, aren't sure how to handle when their bodies are failing them. I mean, it's really an unimaginable situation. And, I knew that I couldn't be a cheerleader and a champion for him at my own expense. I just wasn't going to be able to do it. And, he was so happy that I said that, cause it wasn't something that he wanted me to do. In fact, in the last days of his life, he said to me, you know, I said yes when you told me that you needed to share everything with me. He said, had I really understood what you were saying, I would never have said yes, because I would never have believed that I could do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And do you, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, so, in the case with either of your husbands, or just even in general in your time, coaching people, is, this can take a toll, obviously, on the relationship. It does change some of the dynamics a little bit. There may be more of a dependency. I know that, there were points at which my mother had to help her partner even use the restroom and things. And that was like, there was some humility in that. And it just changed the nature of what intimacy looked like for them, what fun looked like for them. What are some things that maybe work for you, or just even generally, what are some things that people can do when they're in these situations and they have to try to, they're still in a relationship and the relationship still exists and needs to function and thrive. So what are your thoughts on that?
We have to be so mindful and so intentional. Just with medical kinds of stuff around, I couldn't have it around. I could not have my home look like a hospital room. And I said to him, I'm going to think about where to easily put things so that stuff isn't in every room or out. I don't want to see it. I don't want it to change how I feel living in my house, being in any room in the house. And he said, first he got a little nervous. This is Mark. And he said, well, I don't know. And I said, let me think about it. And then let me bring it to you and see what you think. And he said, okay. And then I figured out what to do and where to put things and how to handle things. And we sat down and talked about it. And I said, look, let's live with it for 3 days. And whatever doesn't work, we'll come back and we'll revisit it and change it. And he said, okay. And at the end of 3 days, I walked in his office and I said, okay, so what do you think? He said, about what? And I said, well, I said in 3 days, if you wouldn't. He said, no, you know what? I love it. It was such a smart thing to do. And he said, it's all working fine for me.
And you're saying like, okay, we're going to keep all the medical supplies in this area of the house or something. So it's not like, here's some things out, or if you have to have a hospital bed or something, to have it maybe look nicer with some, more comforts of home versus like just the starkness of that. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah. And IV poles and boxes of stuff. And it's a lot. It becomes a lot. It becomes a lot.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you think that you're particularly well suited to this because you're a psychologist, because you really have this understanding? Like, it must be very hard for you. And I'm sorry that, you've lost 2 partners.
Thank you.
Maybe some other people would be like, oh, I'm never doing that. I can't get married again. I can't be. But you clearly, you've been divorced, and then you've had a partner pass, and then you've had another partner. I've had a couple people with some loss in their life recently. It's like tearing them apart, right? And they don't have your understanding. They don't have that, basis in psychology or desire to process, and generally they're not as big of talkers. Do you think like this helps you to go through life? Because inevitably, right, we're all going to die. Maybe some will be quick, some will be drawn out, but all of the stuff you're doing, is it ease your ability to deal with this?
It's a good question. I was a grief and loss professional, psychologist / professional, before, both Gary and Mark, were diagnosed with cancer. And I, did my PhD, I did my dissertation on, psychosocial support, a family-centered psychosocial support in palliative care settings, right? Family, because I saw years before I even knew Mark, I saw that when somebody in the family is ill, family-centered, that everybody in the family was involved. It's not about the person who's sick. It's about every single person in the family has a reaction and then goes through their own experiences. Psychosocial support in family-centered psychosocial support in palliative care settings when there was nothing else to do. When now it was really about end of life and keeping the ill person comfortable and out of pain. And then how do you handle end of life? How do you as a person handle end of life with your partner? And before Gary got sick, I was at USC Medical Center, at the Norris Cancer Center, and I was doing a group. I actually created a group for residents. And the group was really about supporting residents in a very rigorous residency program. And it was about providing services to residents who were providing services in a multicultural setting, multicultural positions, providing services in a multicultural setting. Because there are a lot of things about end of life and about death and dying that are very different in different cultures. And USC saw that. This is many years ago, and came to me, and that's when I developed a prototype group that is now a group in many, many medical schools around the world, so that we could talk to European or South American doctors, or at an Israeli pediatrician who was a pediatric oncologist dealing with Latinos, dealing with Asians. And when in the Asian culture, it's terrible to you can't die with blood in the body. Well, if you're in palliative care, then they might really want you to do a procedure to stop the blood or the bleeding or to remove the blood in the body. And if you don't understand what the cultural implications are, then you really can't provide services in the very best way, care to your patients in the very best way, those kinds of things. Fast forward to Gary being diagnosed, and then to Mark. It was such an eye-opening experience for both of them. With Mark, I was really living my diagnosis. Living my dissertation. I was literally walking through the pages of my dissertation many, many years later. But being on the other side, no matter how well trained I was, no matter how experienced I was, each experience with each of them was so different and so eye-opening that there were things that I could never have possibly known or understood. And I think it is one of the benefits of working with people, partners, when one is ill, because I've lived it twice, and they were both so different from each other, and experiences that I didn't have, even though I was well-trained and highly experienced. So it's a good question. And I think that my temperament, I do a lot of research, I ask a lot of questions, I bump up against authority. So I think that my temperament, more than my training, is what helped me to get through their illnesses and deaths. And I think that my willingness to stick to my guns, to know what I needed, and to talk about what I needed to both of them, so that I could get my needs met while I was doing everything I could do for them on their path. Because each of us, we're not walking the same path. No, we're walking together, and we as partners have different paths and different journeys, even though we're fighting the same battle, so to speak. Does that make sense?
And you mentioned that Mark was Midwestern, but you didn't say what Gary was. Is he like an East Coaster or something?
No, Gary was a farm boy.
Uh-huh.
And his family, had farms, and they had contiguous farms. And so he was one of 7, and his father was one of 8, and his mother. So there were aunts and uncles and cousins, many, many, many of them. And so they were very family oriented. They were very close. They would go from barn to barn, painting the barn and helping each other. So there was this way, that he came from a very, very big family, and
They all wanted to be involved, or
he clammed up. He did turtle. He didn't want to tell anybody. He didn't want any help. He didn't want any advice. He didn't want anything. Right? He literally just did turtle.
Wow.
Again, that was his temperament, not his history.
Well, that's interesting. I keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
I know. I just had this one question because I want to go back to something you said earlier about both of them. You said both of those experiences were so different. Where they're from is different. Their dynamics are different. Their temperaments are different, and that you learned something from each of those experiences that might have been unique. What were some of you said some of the same things were that you know what you needed and you were able to talk about it, but what were some of the unique learning moments for you for each of those experiences?
Because Gary was so relaxed, I can be very intense. And so what I learned to do was to sort of modulate my own intensity, or talk to friends, or be upset outwardly, or angry. There were things that happened along the way with both of them that really upset me, made me mad, as well as being scared and overwhelmed and all of that. And Gary would not have done well with my intensity. Because he was already dealing with so much that was new for him, and doing it very mindfully, very intentionally. They were both people who, when they were ill, were so kind to other people. They were never ill-tempered. They never said a cross word in a mean voice to anybody about anything. They were so kind. And one of the things that I wanted to do was really respect that, and understand who I was, and then have some of those needs met someplace else. Mark was very, and I was much older by the time I met and married Mark. And, he wanted to be together. You know, wherever we were, he would reach for my hand. He would find a leg to put, it didn't matter. He always wanted to know what I thought and what I was feeling, and share with me what was going on for him. So he was very open. But again, we were both older, and his temperament was very different. So my experience was, less, I had to observe myself less, and sort of decide what I would say or how I would say it less, which, was very nice. Although I could have done that again, but we were closer. We never stopped being close. And I think that, Gary and I had to find our way back to each other several times. Mm-hmm. And that's also something that partners need to know is a possibility, not to be scared by it, not to worry that the closeness or the intimacy is gone forever, that it really is a path, and that all things are possible on the path. And that is always my message.
Well, and the reality is, people can be sick and chronically ill, and then the other person could die in a car accident. You know what I mean? Like, that's the reality of our existence here. And that's what I try, to relate to people. Like, we just have to be living as much as we can. And I do think it's interesting. You talked about the multicultural, doctors treating a different variety of, people from different cultural backgrounds, but also, just amongst, people born in this country, so different, right? Just radically different. And then even a person like, I'm very much a critical thinker. And when I go to the doctor, which is extremely rare, don't hear a thing they say. Like, I've already decided what the problem is. And if they were to say, oh, you have this problem, I like get the gist of it, right? And I've dated a couple medical people and then a couple legal people, and they want to know all the details. I'm like, I don't know. Look, I have this problem, I have this disease, and I'm like, whatever. And I just like, it's like part of me, I just am like, what's going to happen is going to happen. I'll decide if I want to take this medicine or not. And what I've experienced is it's frustrating for the other person because especially if they're medical or whatever, they want all these questions. I'm like, if you need to come, then if you need these questions answered, then you need to come to the appointments because I'm just never going to be that person. Like, I've already kind of decided, what's going to happen is going to happen. And yes, I will take something seriously, but you won't like this. I do, read the internet and decide all my treatment based on what I look up. But it's like, that's the way that I get through the world, right? And it is very interesting. It's hard that has been a real source of conflict between me and other people,
I'll give you a hint. That if you are interested in treatments and you're interested in drugs and what they do and if they're safe and blah, 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 talk to the pharmacist in a hospital pharmacy. I always say this to everybody, clients, friends, family members, a neighbor the other day. I said, call such and such a hospital and speak to the pharmacist. Mm-hmm. Right? Because they know everything about what is going on today. They don't have a vested interest. So often doctors have a vested interest because of the sales people that bring the drugs into there. So we don't ask a doctor about a drug. I mean, really. So pharmacists.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm the opposite of you. I'm the person that walks in with a spiral notebook and a pen, and I date the page. I ask them to spell the words that I don't understand, to define things I don't, so that I have a log, and I have to know, I have to understand what's going on, and then what that translates to my ability to feel safe when I'm out of control.
Yeah. And I think in a partnership, one should just honor that in the other person. Like, you want to bring your notebook. Like, I'm the sick one. You want to come to the appointments with me. You love me. That's great. You're going to have to bring your notebook. You're going to have to ask these questions because I'm not going to ask anything. I'm going to ask like 1 or 2 questions that I'm done. I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
It's happened every time. Like, oh, you think I need surgery? Okay, great. And then I leave and I don't like, everyone always like, what did they say? I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea what they said. And it's like a weird thing, right? It just, something is
very common. Mm-hmm. It's very common. And it is probably very much like you in other situations, right? Because it's temperament. It's how we do one thing is normally how we do everything. So I wouldn't imagine that you're very intense in one place and then more relaxed in another place.
I am. That's the weird thing. Well, I'm known to be extremely intense person. Like, everybody tells me that. But yeah, super intense. But that part shuts off.
But flip this around, Tracy. Like, if you were with a partner who was more intense and more critical, like needed to know, had the spiral notebook, and you were more like laid back, would that make that person who was ill feel like you were being aloof?
Like you ask me a lot of questions sometimes, and I'm like, oh, I just have to turn my face to the side and be like, oh my God. Cause I'll be like, and then sometimes I'm like, okay, I don't know. Stop asking me these questions, right?
Flip it around the other way though. Like, what do you do, Dr. Jackie, when not the ill person is the one with the notebook and the partner is like, I don't know, whatever questions. Does that feel like a dismissive kind of a relationship? It feels like it's more okay the other way around, but it feels like it lacks partner support.
Communicate, right? The person who's ill needs to understand. They need Dr. Jackie Black.
Yes. And you have to know who your partner is. And if you're with a partner who is like Gary Black, for example, if something had happened and I needed something, I wouldn't have depended on him or made him do it or been mad at him because he didn't do it. I would have called my daughter.
See? Exactly. You got to know who you're with.
So I'm not going to call Tracy if I get sick, is really what the moral of the story is.
No, because you're going to get mad that I'm going to be like, okay, what's the general gist? Are you dying or are you not? Is this something you need to get medicine for, right? It is interesting you bring that up. Like, I know Corey would take that personally. Like, I didn't, like, you know, you don't care about me. It's like, well, I don't care about the details. You know?
Well, it's not even that you care or that you don't care. It's in this situation, it's your temperament. It's how you show up. And one of the biggest problems is when partners expect their partners to be different, because that is a recipe for disaster.
Say that again.
When we expect people to be different than they are because we need something, it is a disaster. We cannot ask people to show up and to be different than who they are.
Exactly. And that goes back to like love language. I mean, similar. It's like, how do you express yourself? How are you? Maybe that person loves you so much, but they are going out to their woodworking shop and whittling a thing while you're in there on your thing and writing down all the questions you're going to ask at the doctor's office. And they're like whittling a thing or playing baseball or whatever. Like, it doesn't mean they don't care. It means they don't process in the same way as you do.
And it's very, very common for people to make meaning out of behavior that's different than them. That's one of the problems with couples when a child dies, is that almost 100% of the time people grieve differently. And that's why divorces are so common when couples lose a child, because their grieving process is different. And one person, I'm thinking of a couple in particular whose son died of AIDS, and she didn't want to talk to anybody. And they would run into people in the grocery store and somebody would say, what's going on? And he would say, oh, Bobby died. And he'd go on and on and on and on and on. And she was just seething. And she would have said, fine, and kept pushing the cart. And it was a fight every time. And he used to say, what is wrong with you? Don't you miss him? Didn't you love him? Well, so, they made it. We did a lot of work and they came to understand how different they both were. It was very hard. He found someone like my daughter in terms of his grieving that he could really talk about, and he could tell stories about his son. She did not want to talk to anybody about anything.
Is it okay to do that in the context of a relationship, to stay in the relationship, but find the other, like have an outside person to be your support person instead of that? Your partner, if you have different, like everything else is good.
Yes.
But, you know, that's different.
Yes. For that period of time that he was grieving. And then at some point he felt restored. It was never okay with him. He wasn't fine that his son died, but he was complete with the grieving process and had stepped back into his life. And he no longer was having the need for those kinds of long conversations. And, then they found their way back to each other. They did a lot of work, a lot of intense work, because she was resentful. And he was just confused. He just didn't get it. It's like, well, what else is going to happen where this is going to come up? And, right, you know, what else don't I know where I might be at risk? And we can't think that way. We have to deal with what's going on in the moment and then come back into the relationship and be present and show up until the next anvil falls from the sky. And maybe it won't.
Well, this is interesting. It's a little bit of a non sequitur. It's about grief, but it's the processing of Susan Klebold, one of the Columbine high school shooters' mothers, right? And she and her husband ended up getting divorced because she wanted to process openly with the world and also to make an impact to try and prevent, you know, further things like that, where the husband clammed up, didn't want to talk about it, couldn't handle what she was doing. They ultimately divorced, you know, and it was basically, I'm sure they're grieving. Their grief was the same, right? But one wanted it either to be not talked about or tamped down. And I think it goes the same for chronic illness, right? Or how do you deal with it if the person's actually terminally ill? Like, you know, they're going to die.
Well, it's two really interesting things that you said, because part of what all the emotional stuff is that's going on is grief and loss. We are grieving the loss of our relationship as we knew it.
Mm-hmm.
We're grieving the loss of safety and security. Now we're threatened. We're grieving the loss of hopes and dreams of a future because the present is being threatened. So that is part of what I help couples understand also, is that they're both grieving, and they're grieving differently. Often the ill partner is grieving the loss of being able to depend on their bodies, a betrayal, so to speak. Their body.
Yeah, they must have a lot of anger, I imagine, comes up with that. I mean,
yes, a
right?
lot of anger, a lot of anger. Yeah.
So what do you do with like the grief that's happening? So like I've seen this happen, and even I experienced this when my mother was sick, is that I sort of had what I felt like was more hope than she did as she was dying. And I couldn't come to terms with the idea that she was letting go and not fighting. And she was, I don't know how she felt about me. Was I doing her any favors by championing, or do I just need to recognize and realize that this is likely the fate? But I've seen and even experienced it in relationships where that with a terminally ill person that there's one that sort of hangs on longer for hope, and I don't, for many reasons. But how does that impact the dynamic, and what kinds of things come from that?
So it's back to having real open conversations. I've had this conversation with my own children. What is hope, and are you hearing me? And do you know that I don't want this and this and this and this? So I know, and Kelly would come to me and be hopeful. She would never give up hope. Never. She would never hear a diagnosis and feel resigned. Never. It's not in her nature. And I know that. So I would never expect her to be different than who she is. And I would hold the space for her hope. But I also would insist that she hold the space for my resignation or my belief. Not that I would be giving up, because that's a judgment. And I'm not judging you. I'm just saying that I wouldn't want anybody to say to me, you're giving up. It's a judgment, and it's not accurate about me. I'm resigned. I'm ready. I'm tired. Whatever all those parts might be for a person. And I want the people in my life to hold the space for me to be okay, and to not judge me, and to not be mad at me. And for me to hold the space for them to be hopeful.
Well, and can I say, having been an outside observer, now that Corey brought up her mom's, what happened with her mom, Corey every day was like, there's a 2% chance, there's a 0.5% chance, there's this, and this can happen. Well, there her mom was really like literally cut up, exposed, being pumped full of drugs. And whether she was even lucid, knowing just, the exhaustion in her body. But then Corey's there championing, right? But you guys didn't really have a chance to talk about it. Like with this, you know what I mean? It was out of the blue. By the time that this all happened, there was no discussing. It wasn't a long-term illness. It was something that happened that was catastrophic. And I don't know that you ever could have gotten on the same page, because it was so out of the blue, right? And
it's why we want to talk about end of life issues for so many years before we get there. Because Kelly would know. See, that would be, if Kelly did that, I would say, yes, there is. Because I would give that to her. I don't want to take that away from her, even though I'm not sharing that. But you only can have those kinds of conversations that you really want to have at the end if you talk about things first, early. She tried to help her dad. Her stepmother recently died, and she'd been sick for 5 years. And she tried to help her dad but how to have these conversations, how to sit down with Abby and say certain things to her and ask her to hold it. And he was not having any part of it. And she said, I'm so glad that we were there with you through Mark and Gary, and that we've talked so much over the years. Mark died in 2005. And that we've talked, and we really are so clear about this. And, I'll probably be around for a really long time, but we'll be able at the end to support each other in being exactly who we are. And
but a lot of people fear that conversation, right? They won't even have it.
A lot of people. It's true. It's true. There's a lot of richness when you choose to have it, but if you don't choose to have it, then you don't choose to have it. I wish I could rule the world and then I would help everybody do that.
Oh my God, we need to shrink you down so that everyone can have a pocket size, Dr. Jackie. I mean, seriously, I do this from a legal standpoint, right? I'm an attorney and nobody wants to talk about it. Even my own girlfriend, right? I've done her documents. They haven't even gotten notarized yet. And she's like, don't bring it up. You say it will happen. I'm like, no, it's going to happen. It is going to happen at some point for all of us. And I'm of the feeling you get in a relationship, you need to discuss everything. You need to get it all out, what you're going to do, the situation, whether it's going to be, how are we going to handle if we split up? How are we going to handle, if somebody gets ill? And there's no harm in that. It's literally, it's going to happen to all of us. And I want to give you a hug, but you're on the other side of the Zoom. It's what you're doing and helping people. And this is what people need. This is because these things are so hard. And Corey's mom, it was a period of only 2 months, but if you're in a relationship with a partner and this is going on for, people can be terminally ill or, have a stage 4 diagnosis that then becomes later terminal, or AIDS. I mean, I was a police officer at the end of the AIDS crisis, and the stuff I saw was so awful, right? So awful. And if you don't understand, if you don't know how to think about it and you cannot talk to each other, it is just going to be a much worse experience. And
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It makes a difficult situation so much worse.
Yeah. It's going to be hard, right? I think that's the thing. It's going to be hard. So if we can find ways to navigate it together with an understanding that each of us are going to do it differently.
Exactly. Here.
Yeah. When my mother was, right after my mother had passed, my brother and I, now granted, we're not in a relationship with each other, but in family, we were grieving incredibly differently. And it created a point of tension because we didn't talk about how we were going to grieve her loss and how it was going to look different between us. And I was out hiking every day. I just needed to get outside. I needed to clear my head. And he would read medical documents, trying to figure out and uncover what went wrong. Where was the point at which something went wrong? And that was his way of coping. I think mine might have been a little healthier. I don't want to place any judgment, but it did seem to make him feel worse. But, I didn't want to read the medical documents and he was getting upset with me. Why don't you want to know? Why don't you want to know? And I was saying, why don't you get outside and go for a walk and just let it go? And I do remember that it created some tension because, even with talking about how you show up differently, is even thinking about when you're talking about your kids and how they even show up differently, as there's other people that are being impacted by a death of a partner, that children, or, one of the things that I've been doing for a while is my mother passed, but her friends have been having a really difficult time with it. And I've become in touch with them and created a relationship with them. And so it's it goes outside of that partnership. It's the ripple effect. And I just know how profound it can be to just be understanding that people are just going to do it differently. But in the moment, if you're not kind of prepared for that, it can create a lot of tension.
Exactly. Yeah. So wise.
People just need to learn. This is what I say every podcast. People need therapy. They need therapists around in their life, and they need to learn how to communicate, and that nobody's way is necessarily worse than the other, but that it's different. And if you can understand, hey, this is why I do this, or this is how I'm going to go through this.
So I'd like to add one thing, because you talk about communication a lot, and you're absolutely right. And I think that the magic sauce, is that how you say that? No.
Magic. I don't know. What are we talking about?
Whatever the sauce is.
Okay.
Secret sauce.
Yeah, I mixed metaphors. Secret sauce.
Secret sauce.
Magic bullet secret sauce. Okay. Is not just communication, but open-hearted vulnerable communication, because we talk all day long of when communication is open-hearted and when we can be vulnerable about what we think, what we feel, what we need, what we want, what we like, what we prefer, what we don't like, that kind of thing. Then we can really be known, so that when we talk to each other, we can talk to each other from a place of really being known and knowing each other. And I think that's what makes the quality of the communication so rich and so healing.
And to say, I mean, ever since we had Dr. Heather Brown, I don't know if you're familiar with her at all, but she came on our show, and her whole thing was about that kind of open-hearted communication in, relationship. And ever since then, I've been much, much better about, what do you need from me? Do you want me to give you advice? Do you want me to be judgmental? Do you want me to get outraged along with you? How do you need that? And a friend's mother recently died, and she went more into her, shell, right? And I had reached out. Would you like me to, reach out to you? Not now. Okay. So then I didn't. Then it became a point of contention. And when we talked on the phone, I said, I'm no longer in the business of trying to be the problem solver for everybody. It just has gotten me in trouble, right? Always, I now say, what do you need? Do you need me to call you every day? Yes. Okay. I'll do that. But until you tell me, I don't know. And I used to be much more pushy and you should do this and you should do that. And this is how you should move forward. And now I say, what do you need? And I think even that question has made so many of my relationships so much better.
Yeah. And another question you might consider is, what do you want me to say? And it might sound silly in the beginning, but what do you want me to say? Because we can say something, we can extend empathy or say something from our heart that we think sounds good, and it will be the wrong thing. What can I say? What would you love to hear right now? And you will be amazed if you do that, how many times people actually know what they want you to say and how they want you to say it.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, Dr. Jackie, do you have any other recommendations? You've given so many ideas for people who are going through this situation about open-hearted, vulnerable communication and being able to be aware of your needs and being able to lean on other people and showing up in your authentic ways. And if someone, for our listeners that, they tune into our podcast all the time, seek out an episode because they're going through something right at the moment and, want, other than contacting you, which I'm sure you'll probably get some traction from that because it sounds like you got a lot of resources and guidance you could help with people in this situation. But what are some takeaways that you might say if someone's listening to this might be their first foray into what do I do? I'm in this situation. I don't know where to turn. What would you recommend?
I would say first, know that how smart you are and how long you're in the relationship has nothing to do with being able to function during this crisis, and that it's a crisis. It's a catastrophe. And you can let yourself feel the bigness, the enormity of what is going on. You don't have to minimize it. You don't have to make it okay. I would invite people to expect, no matter where they live, to expect a quagmire of trying to get through the medical system, no matter what country you live in, no matter what your insurance plan is or not. It's going to be a fight. And that maybe you want to hire a virtual assistant to make some of the calls for you so that you can step away if you don't have the energy or the brain cells for the kind of conversations that you might have to have with insurance companies, or getting an appointment, or having a doctor be 4 hours late and have you sit there with somebody who's ill, or be the person who's ill. So you want to have help, right? You want to hire people, and you can hire people for all kinds of things, to make phone calls, to go with you, to drive you. You can take an Uber or a taxi so that you're not constantly thinking about managing everything in your life and being present in the situation at the moment, at the doctor's or at a
Mm-hmm.
hospital procedures or, that kind of thing. And the other thing would be to realize that you're only one person and you can't do everything, and to let the dishes sit in the sink or hire the girl kid from next
Right.
door to do the dishes, right? To really focus on doing what you can do and spending time with your partner. Be together, watch television, watch funny movies, read together. Even if somebody is sick or they're in pain, when you speak to your partner, I'm speaking to the non-ill partner, to the care partner, don't assume that they're in pain and they can't, or they don't feel good and they can't, or they're weak and they can't. It's not true. It really isn't true. It's many, many years of experience, and I'm here to tell you that when people know what you need, when they can be there, and if they doze while you're reading, they still are hearing your voice, you're still together, you're still doing something that they love and appreciate, and it's that exchange of energy. So don't worry about the doing stuff. Really focus on being together as much as you can. And before you go to doctor's appointments, I do this with clients. We sit down and make the list of questions, as you were talking about, Tracy. What are the questions and what are the follow-up questions and what are the things that you need around this? And so I often will help the people to get through the medical system in whatever country they're living in. So I hope
to get those resources, right? Like to get a therapist, to get somebody to help you, or, talk about it and figure that out, and give yourself some grace. Maybe everything's not going to get done, right? So this is what it is. I mean, that would drive Corey crazy, but I would leave stuff undone and just be, whatever at this point. But then also recognizing that also could be driving the other person crazy, right? Because like you said, you want to be so comfortable in your home. You don't want to come in and be tripping over, seeing medical stuff all over the kitchen or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Anywhere, kitchen, bathroom, nowhere. I want it anywhere.
You're like an angel. I really want to clone you.
Thank you so much.
I mean, seriously, you're really doing this work that I think is truly, truly so important, and it will affect us all, and people just really put it off, and they're just so frightened of these talks, and yet this would help so much. And I really appreciate you helping people through these really, really hard transitions in life.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure, and it's a sacred trust to work with people who are going through these kinds of life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wish I knew about you when with my parents, partners, and they were going through this, because I think it would have been very, very helpful.
You managed it very well, Corey.
Oh, well, with
Corey's
my mom.
like a superhuman being. She just I've never seen anybody handle something so awful so well. So give yourself some credit, Corey.
Yeah, well, a lot of therapy and a lot of hiking.
Yeah, but that's what you needed, and you did it, and you managed everything. And this is the reality. We will all die. That is the truth. And there's not one person who's not going to escape from that.
Well, and we're all going to have people
who's
around
going
us
to
that die as well, so we're the ones.
Yeah, we're going to all have to deal with it.
Partners who say, they say, I don't want to go first because I don't want you to have to grieve my loss,
But we have no choice. We have no choice.
We don't.
We don't know when it will come upon us,
So like Dr. Jackie says, we got to talk about these things.
Yeah.
We really do. So what's next on the horizon for you, Dr. Jackie? You said you've been doing stuff around, coaching, but if our guests wanted to reach out to you, our listeners, what kinds of things would they be able to do? Could they get coaching from you? Are there resources you could provide?
Absolutely. They could get coaching from me. And they can, what would be the easiest thing? I guess my website is drjackieblack.com. And my email is drjackie DRJACKIE at drjackieblack.com. And I am available. As I say, I work in 8 time zones. So I work when it's convenient for you, not when it's convenient for me. And I am happy to work with couples. You know, I've been doing a new sort of mix in my mix of services. And that is that I'm working with people like 5 sessions. Because not everybody needs coaching for 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. They don't need like a lot. Sometimes people have a lot. They've done a lot of work in their lives. They've done a lot of living in their life, and they just need somebody to help them pull out some of the skills, some of the experiences, package them up for them a little differently, and then send them off to really be in their life. And so the short-term offer is brand new for me, and I'm really liking it.
And I think that's genius,
right? And I love honoring that people have life experience, they've done coaching, they've been in therapy, that we don't have to start from scratch and work for a word.
Right.
Sit down, figure out where are your strengths, what do you need now, what would be helpful, and then have people go out and live in their life. And of course, I'm always here if they need to touch base, and I'm happy to do that. I know a lot of therapists and coaches don't want to do that. To buy the package, you know, they won't do a one-off. And I'm here to serve. I'm here to give people whatever they need to be in their lives in a way that works for them. So, I offer.
That's super refreshing because I know that this is probably an extraordinarily stressful time for people, and to not have to like be thinking about the logistics of the package and all that stuff. You know, it's sometimes it's just nice
or that you're going to be long term, like, oh, I have to tell this lady, and then we have to get into my life history and all this. No, this is a crisis.
I can get what I need and have that support.
And the other thing is, I always suggest to people that they be cooking or walking or gardening, right? That they're not tied to their computer or their phone, or that they're moving, that they're doing whatever they're doing in their own life. Maybe they're out and they can park in under a tree and talk to me and again, you can talk to me for 45 minutes, for 60 minutes, for an hour and a half, whatever you need. Because a lot of times we don't even have the brain cells to have an hour and a half conversation.
Genius. So. A genius angel. Look at that.
Oh, thank you.
Wow. Well, Dr. Jackie, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on here. I know this topic is very heavy. And particularly, I know that I would be surprised if any of our listeners haven't gone through some type of grieving process at some point. And so this may be dredging up some things for them, certainly for me with my mother. You know, but it's really important that we talk about it. And I'm overwhelmed with kind of hope for this idea of like the validation of the fact that we all just do this differently, and we show up and we do the very best that we can. And that gives me a sense of ease, because I know that just feels really nice to be able to lean on that, knowing that these difficult situations come up and we just honor the fact that we all are just trying to be our best selves. And
we didn't create these situations, and people take on so much guilt for things they didn't create. And then now they're in the middle of it and they're like doing the best they can.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't take enough grace for themselves for doing their best. They judge their best.
Right. Exactly. So really, thank you again, Dr. Jackie. And to all of our listeners out there, I do hope you get on Dr. Jackie Black's website, drjackieblack.com. We'll put the information in the show notes. And it was just, again, thank you so much for being here. And for all of our listeners out there, until our next episode, go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.